Temperate and fruitful, the Westerlands, as you can probably guess from their name, are on the west side of Westeros. The Westerlands touch the Sunset Sea, are shielded by high hills to the east, and are located close to the Ironborn to the north. However, only the Riverlands and the Reach touch the Westerlands territory. The land itself is full of rolling plains, rugged hills, craggy shorelines, misty dales, blue lakes, broadleaf forests that have a variety of animals for hunting, sparkling rivers, fertile fields, and much more flatland in the southern area. There are also caves and wooded hills that turn and twist to reveal treasures deep beneath the earth, which is a massive understatement. The Westerlands are full of areas that pour out silver and gold in large quantities. Some of the notable mines in the Westerlands are the Golden Tooth, Castamere, Nuns Deep, Pendrick Hills, and Casterly Rock, but I'll get into those later. Throughout the Westerlands history, settlements built near ore mines would become ghost towns when the mine finally dried up. The men of the Westerlands are known as Westermen, and the surname for their bastards of noble origin is Hill. But before the coming of the first Westermen, which were the first men, the Westerlands in Westeros was occupied by the Children of the Forest and the Giants. Specifically in the Westerlands, the woods were the home of the Children of the Forest, and the Giants lived in the hills of this area. Maesters have reported that giant bones can still be found in the hills from time to time. But as we know, the first men came to Westeros during the Dawn Age via the Arm of Dorne, and began to fight with the Children. As the first men moved up through Westeros, they came to the Westerlands and began to cut down the forests, make roads through the hills where the Giants lived, and plow the fields. The Children of the Forest soon vanished into the hollow hills, the deep woods, and the far north when they realized they were no match for the weapons of the first men. They began to retreat as the first men spread across the west, building farms and villages, forts, and then stone castles. Finally, even the Giants could not withstand the intruders and disappeared. Like many areas of Westeros, the first men that settled began to accumulate power and make themselves into lords and petty kings. Lots and lots of fighting petty kings. Maesters claim many of the great houses in this area trace their roots back to the Dawn Age of the first men, such as the Plums, Brooms, Foots, and Hawthorns sprang up during this time. In the Dawn Age, and really even now, the Ironborn were an issue for the coastal first men in the Westerlands, so it was lucky the Farmans of Fair Isle defended the western coast during the Dawn Age against the Ironborn with their longships. The Rains of Castamere, you know from that famous song, also existed in the Dawn Age. They made an incredibly rich system of tunnels, caves, and mines as their own subterranean seat that would one day really screw them over. The Greenfields made a timber castle built entirely of weirwood they called Bower at the time, but now is just called Greenfield. The Westerlings built their castle, the Crag, above the waves. Then there are the Westerland houses that rose up from legendary heroes who are still talked about in this region to this day. There are the Moorlands who came from Pate the Plowman, the Yews from the Blind Bowman, Alan O the Oak, the Baneforts from the Hooded Man, and the Craikalls from Crake the Boar Killer. However, as powerful as those families were, the greatest lords in this region were the Casterlys of the Rock. Their seat was located beside the Sunset Sea and was built of colossal stone. And because I love a good story, there is a legend of the first Casterly Lord. So the first Casterly Lord was Carlos, son of Castor, a huntsman who lived in a village near to where Lannisport would one day be built. Carlos hunted a lion when it began to prey on the village's sheep. Armed with only a spear, he tracked it to its den, the cave in the base of the rock, and killed the lion and his mate. However, the huntsman had a heart and decided not to kill their newborn cubs, because they were going to do great without their parents. But this act of mercy, though really was it, pleased the old gods, as this was before the Seven came to Westeros, and legend states the gods sent a sudden shaft of sunlight deep into the cave. Carlos looked upon where the light shone, and in the stony walls, he saw the gleam of gold, a vein that was reported to be as thick as a man's waist. Again, because it is a halfway epic story, the Maesters question whether it's true, but I'm going with it because the gods totally reward people all the time for doing good deeds in the world of ice and fire. Soon Carlos, or someone in his family, mined the gold in the rock, moved into the mine, and fortified the cave entrance so no one could take his precious. The Casterlys continued to live in the cave, and over the centuries they went deeper and deeper, mining the gold, tunneling, creating stairways, galleries, halls, and basically a pretty awesome home. Finally, their creation of carved gigantic stone would dwarf every castle in Westeros. What is interesting about the Casterlys is despite this great wealth, power, and impressive home, they were never kings. They just remained the richest lords in all of Westeros and most powerful lords in the Westerlands for hundreds of years, until the Age of Heroes, and didn't want the title. Big deal in the Dawn Age. And of course, because all good things come to an end, during the Age of Heroes, they got screwed. So during the Age of Heroes, Lann the Clever, a golden-haired pretty boy, came to the Westerlands. This rogue has a few supposed origins. Some say he was an Andal adventurer from across the Narrow Sea who came to the Westerlands, though the Andals coming to Westeros was a millennia in the future from when he showed up, or less depending on who you talk to. But regardless, the Andals were a long way from coming to Westeros. Then there's the theory he was a bastard of Rowan Goldtree or Floris the Fox, both legendary daughters of Garth Greenhand, the mythical High King of the First Men. Of course, the favorite origin story in the Westerlands is that Lann tricked Garth Greenhand and posed as one of his sons. Given that guy had a lot of kids, he wouldn't recognize Lann wasn't one of them, which is sort of creepy and makes you think how much that actually happened. You know, if it actually happened. But anyways, in this story, he poses as Garth's son and makes off with part of the inheritance that belonged to Garth's children. Nice. Trust me, this guy gets worse, just wait for it. Regardless of his origin, during the Age of Heroes, Lann somehow tricked the Casterlys out of their castle, and he took over the rock. The Maesters have many theories on how Lann accomplished this, but the popular theory is that the rogue found a secret passage in the rock that was so narrow, he had to go in naked and covered in butter. Man, did he really want that home? Can you imagine the bugs? That's just gross. Once, all naked and buttered up, Lann got inside the rock. He went what I can only describe as full asshole. Once in the castle, this jerk would howl in the darkness like a demon, which convinced the Casterlys that the rock was haunted by a creature that would never let them live in peace. He'd also steal treasures from one brother and put it in another area, rigged various snares and deadfalls. Yeah, he made traps consisting of heavy weight, positioned to fall on people, and trap falls. He's an asshole. He also would whisper threats in the ears of sleeping Casterlys because every day is April Fool's Day when you're Lann. Finally, his good deeds caused the Casterlys to be suspicious and at each other's throats. Of course, there's other versions of the story that really don't make him look any better. In another version, he smuggles a pride of lions inside, which kills and eats, maybe not in that order, the Lord of the Rock and his sons. And then Lann gets it on with Lord Casterly's wife and daughters. You know, the grieving family members of the people he just killed with lions. I'm just assuming he's the type of guy to force orgies with the mom and daughters. Just throwing that out there. This isn't helped by another version of the story where Lann steals in night after night and rapes the Casterly women. Yeah, he just sneaks in and had, quote, his way with the Casterly maidens whilst they slept. Like, holy hell, dude, that is dark. Surprise, in 9 months the maids all gave birth to golden-haired children while claiming they had no knowledge of ever having sex. And we know how precious a woman's virtue was in that time, so good job, Lann. Yes, psychopath. Also, to add to his great reputation, he stole gold from the sun to brighten his curly hair, so obviously he's a serial thief. Honestly, the nicest version of the story is Lann just flooded the rock with rats, mice, and other vermin and ran the Casterlys out of their home. Yeah, that's the nice version. In this case, I'm actually glad the Maesters have a much more tame version of what they think happened. An Archmaester believes that Lann was actually a retainer or a household guard who got Lord Casterly's daughter, or daughters, pregnant. Since they're assuming Lord Casterly had no sons when he died, the rock passed to a daughter and therefore Lann. But really the Maesters have no idea which is the most true, and honestly, I'm hoping for the last one, and that the daughter consented to it, and that Lann wasn't the total crazy he's painted to be. Genius, but crazy. So, during the Age of Heroes, the Casterlys mysteriously disappeared, maybe chopped into pieces by the serial killer Lann, and the Lannisters, as they became known as, appeared to rule in their place along with large areas of the Westerlands. Interestingly, given Lann's apparent need for things, he never claimed or called himself a king, which was definitely the thing to do back then. After he died, he would be considered a king, but not during his actual lifetime. Instead, Lann remained ruling the Rock as Lord until the age of 312. In that time, he managed to sire 100 graceful, lean, fair-in-the-face daughters, and 100 brave sons, all with hair as golden as the sun. The histories of the Rock and Westerlands hint that the early Lannisters were really fertile. Actually, the Lannisters are still pretty fertile. So the early Lannisters were popping out so many babies that within a few generations, Lann's descendants could no longer be contained by the Rock. Instead of making the Rock bigger by digging, the lesser branches of the house went to make their home in a village a mile away. The sons and daughters of these lesser branches of House Lannister picked this area for its closeness to the Rock, but also because the sea had an abundance of fish, a fantastic natural harbor, and fertile land. This village grew quickly into a city named Lannisport, and the Lannisters of Lannisport picked a really great spot. Lannisport would become the second biggest city in Westeros. Old Town would beat it, before the Andals ever arrived, and ships from every corner of the world would sail to the western coast to trade at Lannisport. This trade made the Lannisters of Lannisport insanely rich, and with those riches, they built great walls around their city to defend it. So let's pick back up talking about the first Lannister king. Though Lann the Clever took Casterly Rock and created the Lannister line, he was never called a king himself. However, the title was given to him after death. But the first true Lannister king was actually called Lorien Lannister, who also went by Lorien the Lion. And as I go through the Westerlands, you'll see a lot of the Lannisters took out nicknames, such as the Lion or the Golden, which makes sense as they had blonde hair and lots of gold, and a sigil that featured a lion. Kind of a no-brainer for nicknames. Lorien dubbed himself the first King of the Rock, and quickly went to work claiming more territory and bringing more power to his house. In order to bring in more territory and more vassals, at one point he wed a daughter of House Rain. He also slew Morgan Banefort, the Hooded King, and his thralls during his reign in a war that's said to have lasted 20 years. Did it actually last 20 years? Hard to say with stories and accounts from that long ago, but it wouldn't be the first war that went on that long in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. So we'll say it went on for up to 20 years. And there's actually a fun little side story to that. Morgan was the last hooded king of House Banefort, and said to have been a powerful necromancer that apparently knew how to hold grudges. As Morgan died, defeated by King Lorien, he cursed his vanquishers. One day, he claimed, he would return from the grave. So Lorien, obviously fearing the man's curse would come true, and being a practical man, decided to cut Morgan's dead body into pieces and fed them to his lions. Try coming back from the grave after that, evil necromancer. Unfortunately, necromancers may be craftier than what we give them credit for. 2 years later, the lions somehow broke free within Casterly Rock and killed 3 of Lorien's sons. So I guess in a way, Morgan kept his promise. Maybe. I'm going to count it. After King Lorien died, his sons and their sons ruled for thousands of years, still stylizing themselves King of the Rock. And all seemed well for some time. The Lannisters had their territory, but not the entire Westerlands just yet. This would all change when the Andals arrived. Due to them landing on the East Coast, it understandably took the Andals a bit to head over to the West Coast. They first took over the Vale, with a little treachery, but that's another video series, and defeated the first men in the Riverlands. Long after that, they finally arrived in the Westerlands, ready to fight. Despite the other kingdoms and regions of the Seven Kingdoms being successfully taken over, for the most part the Northerners managed to keep the Andals out, the Lannisters still chose to fight. The first Andal warlord that came to their territory was attacked while going through the hills of the Westerlands. King Tybolt Lannister, also called Thunderbolts, I love that nickname, brought the Andal warlord and his army to their knees. So the first Andal attack was actually successfully beat back. But if you know your Andals, you know they don't give up that easily. After the first attack, more Andals came to the Westerlands in an attempt to conquer them. The second and third attacks were quickly smashed, just like the first one. But that didn't stop the Andals, who kept coming in waves and waves of both large and small groups. Finally, King Tyrion III and his son Gerald II knew it was only a matter of time before they conquered them, as they saw larger and larger Andal groups invade the Westerlands. Instead of fighting like those before them, the two men decided on diplomacy. The Maesters agree that King Tyrion and his son Gerald were sage kings, as they carefully arranged marriages for the more powerful of the Andal war chiefs with daughters of the great houses of the Westerlands. Being intelligent and knowing what happened in the Vale under the Andals' attack, they also went a step further. The Lannisters asked for the sons and daughters of Andal lords. These children became wards and served as pages, cupbearers, and squires at Casterly Rock, and of course hostages if the Andal lords got any funny ideas. Or rather, stabby ideas. This relationship between the Lannisters and Andals was a huge deal. This is one of the few examples of the Andals actually allowing a territory with a king of First Men origins to expand their power. As time went on and to further cement their alliance with the Andals, Lannister kings began to wed their children to Andals. Eventually, these marriages led to the first Andal taking the throne as King of the Rock. So when King Gerald III died with no sons and one daughter, who was married to the Andal Joffrey Lyddon, a council decided that he was good enough, married to a deceased king's only daughter, crowned him and gave him the last name Lannister, and declared he was the first Andal to rule the Rock. This was a big step towards furthering the First Men-Andal bond in the Westerlands and with the Lannisters. The Maesters point out that other noble houses were born from these Andal First Men unions, including Brax, Merbran, Drox, Jast, Leford, Perrin, Kendall, and Sarsfield. Although the Lannisters and Andals were getting pretty tight, the Westerlands still weren't completely under Lannister control yet. There was still plenty of conquering and expanding to do, which the Kings of the Rock were all too happy to be a part of. Tyrion Lannister defeated 3 lesser kings when they made an alliance against him. Through their defeat, he managed to push out the Lannister border as far east as the Golden Tooth and its surrounding hills. Next, Tommen Lannister built a huge fleet so that he could bring Fair Isle under the control of the Lannisters. Tommen married the daughter of the last Farman king of Fair Isle to further solidify his hold on the Isle. Later, when King Lorien II took the throne, he held the first tourney ever in the Westerlands and managed to defeat every single knight that went against him. But the Lannisters didn't stop there. King Lancel Lannister, also known as Lancel the Lion, went to war against the Gardener Kings of Highgarden. This guy was incredibly impressive and conquered the Reach all the way down to Old Oak before dying in battle. But as we see plenty of times in our own history, the achievements of the father can quickly be lost by the sons. When Lancel's son, Lorien III, came to the throne, he lost everything his father had obtained in the Reach. Because apparently the thing to do is make barely veiled references to a man's penis when he doesn't live up to your expectations, this led to the man being called Lorien the Limp. I'm sure you did your best, Lorien. The Limp was followed by better kings, though. King Gerald Lannister, also known as Gerald the Great, earned his nickname by raiding the Iron Islands during his time as King of the Rock. In his raid, he took back 100 Ironborn hostages before returning home. And if you think that is random, it isn't. The Ironborn were constantly hammering the West Coast and the Westerlands. The Ironborn were the flies in everyone's soup, sometimes a knife in their back, for a long, long time. So this was actually a smart, calculated move by Gerald. With his 100 Ironborn hostages in the Westerlands under lock and key, he vowed to hang one prisoner every time the Iron Men dared raid his shores. So I don't know if the Ironborn thought he was bluffing, they didn't care about the hostages, or they just can't help putting their hands in cookie jars that just don't belong to them, but they still decided to raid the Lannister shores. But I guess what they didn't know is that he wasn't bluffing, and Gerald ended up hanging 20 of the hostages. And if you thought the Ironborn would learn their lesson from this, you don't know how thick the Ironborn are. Sometime later, they attacked Land's Point. The battle was called Battle of Land's Point, very creative, and King Lancel IV is said to have beheaded the Ironborn King, Harold Halfdrowned, and his heirs in a single stroke of the Valyrian steel greatsword, Bright Roar. A Valyrian steel sword the Lannisters bought a century before the Doom of Valyria, which will have its own video. After this, King Lancel decided he wanted a piece of the Reach for his kingdom. While the King of the Reach, Giles III Gardner, was having it out with the Storm King in the east, King Lancel invaded. This invasion did not go well, and Lancel was killed in the battle at Red Lake by Wilbert Osgrey, the Little Lion. But not before Lancel mortally wounded Wilbert with Bright Roar. With the death of their King of the Rock, the Westermen headed home. In all this, Lancel did manage to help out the Stormlands, though. In attacking the Reach, he forced the King of the Reach to return from the Stormlands to deal with the Westerlands in his territory. Had Lancel not done this and forced the King's return, the King of the Reach may have completed his conquest of the Stormlands. So, Stormlands, you actually owe the Westerlands just a little bit. Of course, just not the Ironborn caused issues. Sometimes the Riverlands and their many kings and petty lords also attacked the Westerlands. Torrens Teague, founder of House Teague, once seized a fortune in gold from an attack on the Westerlands. And we know some of the eastern hills that were once ruled by the kings of the rivers and the hills are now a part of the Westerlands. But let's move on to some of the not-so-great Lannister kings. While some were wise, brave, and open-handed, other kings of the Rock didn't quite match up. King Norwyn Lannister was known as Norwyn the Niggardly for how petty he was. King Lorien IV, also called Lorien the Lackwit, wasn't the smartest king and known for being feeble, weak, and cruel. He was dubbed Queen Loria when it was found out he loved to dress in his wife's clothing and wandered the Lannisport docks as a prostitute. Sadly, because of his love for women clothing and role-playing, the name Lorien was rarely used for future kings, and the name died out quite a bit in the Westerlands. The Lannisters also had some kings with dark tendencies. King Tyrion II, the Tormentor, was a strong king that could wield a battle axe in battle like none other. However, he was called the Tormentor for a reason. He loved to torture people. It is believed he could not desire a woman and sleep with her until first he made her bleed. Now, how much he made these women bleed is a guess. I'm hoping it wasn't full-on stabbing, but maybe a little paper cut. Great kings, bad kings, and somewhere in between, the Lannister territory finally expanded to include the western shore to the headwaters of the Red Fork and Tumbleton, and from the southern shore of Iron Man's Bay to the borders of the Reach. These boundaries are pretty much the same for the Westerlands in modern Westeros time. Though before the Targaryens' arrival in the Seven Kingdoms, Lannister territory could change a little bit from invasions and other conflicts, but they would always be reconquered all over again. To the east, they were constantly contending with the kings of the Trident, and to the south, they went up against the Gardeners of the Reach repeatedly. Because the Westerlands were so rich in resources and trade, and because their coastline was so close to the Iron Islands, they also endured raids from the Ironborn. Given how poor the islands are and the Ironborn's constant need to reeve, this should come as no surprise, though. For such a poor territory, how could they resist stealing from the Lannisters, who had tons of gold and silver mines, ore, and more? No mines in the world are as rich as those of Casterly Rock. Some mines have been utilized for 1,000 years and still haven't run dry. The Westerlands' wealth was so well known that as far as the Shy by the Shadow, merchants asked travelers from the Seven Kingdoms if it were true that the Lion Lord lived in a palace of solid gold, and if they could really plow their fields and obtain gold. Because of how poor the Iron Islands were and are, the Ironborn and their greed for resources was cause for a new war between the Iron Islands and Westerlands to break out every generation. Not even periods of peace would keep the Ironborn away as they reaved up and down the west coast for salt wives and wealth. Because of the Ironborn's behavior, the Farmans of Fair Isle had a huge responsibility in guarding the coast further south. Farmans are said to still despise the Ironborn because of this. Despite this animosity, the Lannisters did try to make peace with the Iron Islands through marriages and wards. Harmonhor II spent his youth as a ward of the Lannisters at Casterly Rock. When Harmon became king of the Iron Islands, the King of the Rock married his daughter Lelia Lannister to him. Because of his Ironborn luck, this did not end well for Lelia's and Harmon's eldest son, when he became King Harmonhor III and opposed many of the cultures and customs of the Ironborn. In a revolt, he was overthrown and his younger brother, Hagon Hor, took his place on the throne and restored all their old traditions. Both Harmon II and Lady Lelia were mutilated for their crimes of daring to eradicate Ironborn traditions. Lady Lannister's lips, ears, eyelids, and tongue were all removed before she was sent back to the Westerlands. As you can imagine, that did not sit well with the Lannisters, as Lelia's nephew now sat as King of the Rock, and he went to war when he saw what they did to his aunt. It was a war that resulted in 10,000 dead, 3/4 of which were Ironborn. Finally, the Westermen landed on Great Wick, destroyed Hagon's host in battle, caught the man, and then mutilated him and killed him in the 7th year of fighting. The Lannisters finally left the Iron Islands when word reached Casterly Rock that Aubrey Crackhall, a general who had been commanding the Lannister forces and killed the king, claimed kingship of the Iron Islands. The Lannisters did not approve and called their warships back and left Crackhall to fend for himself, which went swimmingly for him. He died super fast. Despite that, the war between the Ironborn and Westermen would go on for 5 more years, and finally they would come to a peace agreement. When the Westerlands left the Iron Islands, they left them impoverished and in rough shape. All the fighting had drained the Ironborn resources, and the winter that followed their war was called the Famine Winter. 3 times as many Ironmen died of starvation than had died in the war between the 2 regions. But the Westerlands would soon have a new problem to deal with. Aegon Targaryen was heading to Westeros to conquer the 7 kingdoms, or conquer as many as he could. So now let's shift into talking about the Lannisters and the Targaryens. To look at the relationship between the Westerlands and the Dragon Riders, let's go back to ancient times. We know the Valyrians are a race of purple-eyed, silver-gold, or platinum-white-haired people that rose to power on Valyria and built their mighty freehold in this area. While not all Valyrians were dragon riders, those that were, the Dragon Lords, ruled Valyria. The Valyrians had an insatiable hunger for wealth and precious resources, including precious metals. This hunger led to war, enslavement of others, and many horrendous acts. However, despite this unending need for resources, they never went after the Westerlands. So in part 2, I talked about how the Lannisters had tons of gold and silver mines, ore, and more, and how no mines in the world are as rich as those of Casterly Rock. Some mines in the Westerlands have been utilized for 1,000 years and still haven't run dry. The Westerlands' wealth was so well known that as far as Ashai by the Shadow, merchants would ask travelers from the 7 kingdoms if it were true that the Lion Lord lived in a palace of solid gold, and if they can really plow their fields and obtain gold. So if this reputation was known that far into Essos, why didn't the Dragon Lord seek to take this wealth? Surely a dragon ride over wouldn't be that hard. They've flown and attacked some impressive distances before. Yet, according to Maesters, there is no evidence the Dragon Lords ever made contact with the Lords of Casterly Rock, the Casterlys or the Lannisters that took the rock from them. There are 2 major thoughts on why the Valyrians did not strike the Westerlands, despite the wealth located there. The first comes from an Archmaester who suggests the Valyrians had actually reached as far as Oldtown in ancient days and attacked. However, during this attack, they either suffered a tragedy or event that made them turn back and shun all of Westeros until the Targaryens. The next idea explaining the absence of the Valyrians from the Westerlands is a lot more fun, but the Maesters believe it's less plausible because Maesters ruin all the fun. Septon Barth, a common-born Septon with a brilliant mind that died in 99 AC, referred to a Valyrian text that has been lost in current A Song of Ice and Fire time. In the text, it suggests the Freehold sorcerers foretold that the gold of Casterly Rock would destroy them. Fearing this prophecy, the Freehold steered clear of the Westerlands and the bounty it contained. Which is interesting, as a century before the Doom, the Lannisters paid what was surely enough gold to raise an army for a Valyrian steel sword from the Freehold. But more on that in another video. So the Westerlands were left to be conquered slowly by the Lannisters as they beat back the Ironborn, the Riverlands, and the Reach until Aegon I Targaryen, a little over a century after the doom of Valyria that led to the destruction of almost all the Valyrians, decided he wanted the Seven Kingdoms. In 2 BC, Aegon, from his family's home of Dragonstone, sent letters to all the rulers of the kingdoms informing them he would be the only king in Westeros, and those that knelt could keep their titles and land. Those that did not would be destroyed. And I've covered Aegon's conquest in quite a few other videos, so for this video I'm just going to go over what is relevant for the Westerlands. Obviously the Lannisters, having dealt with many conflicts over the centuries as they carved out and held control of their territory, weren't on board for giving up their title as Kings of the Rock. The current King of the Rock, Loren Lannister, planned for how he would deal with the Targaryen threat as Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sister wives took the Riverlands and the Stormlands. Despite being enemies of the Reach many times throughout history, King Loren knew he would need the current King of the Reach, Mern the Ninth Gardener, to have a chance against the Dragon Lord and his host. So the 2 kings, Loren Lannister and Mern Gardener, joined their armies in the Northern Reach below the walls of Golden Grove. Their army totaled 55,000 strong, with over 5,000 mounted knights. It was considered the greatest host ever seen in Westeros, though House Gardener brought half as many more men than Loren. And Gardener may have had an even bigger host had his vassal, House Hightower, not refused to join him, but that's a video for the Reach series. Taking their mighty host, the 2 kings marched north from Golden Grove to attack the would-be Dragon King. But Aegon heard of their coming, gathered his forces, and went forward to meet the 2 kings, moving much quicker with only a fifth of the men. Aegon's sister wives with their dragons met him at the Stony Sept and on the wide open plains south of the Blackwater Rush, near the present Gold Road, the 2 armies clashed. While House Lannister commanded the right, House Oakhart commanded the left, and House Gardener the center. They attempted to flank Aegon and smash his center with knights, but Aegon and his forces managed a defensive crescent. When the kings charged forward to break Aegon's spear lines, things went real bad for the defenders. Dragons have a distinct advantage of being able to fly really high and spit fire. So that is exactly what Aegon and his 2 sister wives did. Taking to the air on their dragons, the 3 siblings set the field on fire from all sides, focusing on the area upwind of the Westerland and Reach armies. The field was incredibly dry and the right condition to create a devastating effect. Even those that managed to escape the flames upwind found Aegon's forces waiting for them to be picked off. At the end of the battle, 4,000 men from the king's armies were killed by the dragons, including the King of the Reach and all his sons, grandsons, brothers, cousins, and kin, and the Order of the Green Hand. 10,000 men suffered horrific burns, and 1,000 men died from swords, arrows, and spears. The swords of the defeated men were sent downriver to Aegon Fort to later become part of Aegon's Iron Throne. This battle was dubbed the Field of Fire afterwards for the devastating flames that engulfed the field and the defenders' army. The only time in Aegon's conquests all 3 Targaryen dragons had taken to a battlefield all at once. Now you may be wondering what about the King of the Rock, who I have not mentioned yet. King Loren, realizing Aegon had won, quickly fled the field of battle and flames to live another day. He suffered no burns or death due to his quick retreat. Loren was found the following day and promptly gave up his kingship of the Westerlands and became known as Loren the Last. After this, Loren and his Westermen, among the other regions Aegon had already conquered, aided Aegon in his march to the north to take the Stark territory. Luckily, the Northern King heard of the previous battles and quickly surrendered without a fight. From the day Loren knelt, the Lannisters became the Wardens of the West and Lords of Casterly Rock, and they bowed under House Targaryen. Aegon was incredibly fair with the Westerlands, as he was with other regions of the Seven Kingdoms, for the most part, and after they submitted, of course. Though now under the control of the Targaryens, the Westerlands, and therefore the Lannisters, were allowed to keep their wealth and remain in control of their region. But that doesn't mean they had equal sway, as the other 6 of 7 kingdoms Aegon had folded into one. The Baratheons, who now controlled the Stormlands, were close to Aegon, as the warden of that area was supposedly Aegon's bastard brother and had helped him since day one of his conquest. We also have the Tullys that had thrown themselves at Aegon and developed close ties with the Iron Throne. The Lannisters had no blood relation to the Targaryens, and too much pride to throw themselves at them to win favor and power at court. Besides the king's royal progresses throughout Aegon I and his son Aenys II's reign on the Iron Throne, the Lannisters and the Westerlands wouldn't have much interaction with the Targaryens. That changed when Maegor I became the third Targaryen king when his brother died and he stole the Iron Throne from his nephew Aegon. Though the Lannisters didn't outright challenge Maegor and demand he give the crown to his rightful nephew, because people quickly lost their life for doing that, instead House Lannister gave protection. When Prince Aegon and his sister wife Rhaena were seeking shelter from their cruel uncle, Lord Lyman Lannister allowed them to stay in his home, extending guest right to them and refusing all of King Maegor's demands to hand them over. Which was brave in itself because Maegor was definitely a loose cannon. Despite keeping Aegon and his wife safe under his roof, Lyman didn't give any of his men to Aegon to fight his uncle. There are some thoughts on why that is, but it would be speculation at best. However, Lord Lannister finally went to action after Prince Aegon, rallying an army, attempted to defeat his uncle, but was instead killed by him at the battle beneath the God's Eye. After the young prince's death, Aegon's youngest brother, Jaehaerys, put a claim for the throne, and finally House Lannister decided to support Aenys' children. This worked out great for House Lannister and the Westerlands, as once Maegor was finally dead and Jaehaerys put on the Iron Throne, House Lannister finally had closer ties to the Targaryens for aiding them. However, the Maesters note that the Baratheons, Tullys, Hightowers, Velaryons, and Arryns still surpassed them in influence. But still, they were closer to the royal house than they had been before, so that's progress. All would be mostly quiet for the Lannisters until the Great Council of 101 AC. This council was called when King Jaehaerys' heirs all died for one reason or another, and a new heir needed to be decided. Instead of having King Jaehaerys do it, lords from all over the realm came to Harrenhal to settle who would sit on the throne next. It came down to two candidates: Viserys, eldest son of Prince Baelon, who had once been Jaehaerys' son and heir before his death, and Lennar Velaryon, son of Princess Rhaenys, who was Aemon's daughter and passed over as a possibility. And if you're losing track of who's related how to what, the Targaryens just love to interbreed and love to use the same names over and over and over. So I have a family tree up. You gotta love those crazy Targaryens, and if you get confused, just look at the family tree. How many Aegons do you need in one family? So back to the Lannisters. Lord Tywin Lannister attended this great council to help decide the succession. Being our lovable, power-hungry Lannisters, they, famously might I add, showed up with 300 bannermen, men-at-arms, and servants. But they got showed up when Lord Tyrell came with 500 in his party. So, A for effort. Lord Lannister chose to stand behind Prince Viserys, which turned out to be a great decision, as he was eventually chosen to rule after King Jaehaerys. When Viserys I ascended to the Iron Throne, he remembered that the Lannisters had backed him and rewarded them for their loyalty. King Viserys I made Lord Jason Lannister's twin brother, Sir Tywin, the Master of Ships, which eventually led to Sir Tywin becoming the Master of Coin for King Aegon II. While a great honor, this unfortunately was a good thing and a bad thing for the Lannisters and the Westerlands. Becoming closer to House Targaryen was great, until the Dance of the Dragons broke out. The war began in 129 AC, when there was a war of succession between Aegon II and his half-sister Rhaenyra over Viserys' throne. Sir Tywin's close relationship with the Iron Throne and favored position brought his brother Lord Jason into this war on Aegon II's side. While many suffered in this realm from this horrible conflict, the Lannisters especially took a blow or two. Sir Jason marched east to fight for Aegon II, but was killed in the battle to Rhaenyra and her forces at the crossing of the Red Fork. Not something the Lannisters like to talk about, but Lord Jason was actually killed by a squire named Pate of Longleaf, who was then knighted after the battle and further called Lion Slayer, which is just ouch. Despite the loss of their lord, the Westerlands fought on. The Westermen marched and won victories under Sir Adrian Tarbeck, then under Lord Lefford before he perished at the fish feed. His Westermen were also slaughtered. To make matters worse, when Sir Jason was away fighting and then dying, the Ironborn had to be the typical assholes they are. The Red Kraken and his reavers fell on the Westerlands that were mostly undefended, ravaging the area. Luckily, Sir Jason had married a Bamf, and his wife, Lady Johanna, barred the gates of Casterly Rock, keeping the Ironborn out. That didn't stop the Ironborn from attacking the rest of the Westerlands, though. The Red Kraken burned the House Lannister fleet and sacked Lannisport. they took grain, trade goods, gold, and hundreds of women and girls to become salt wives. And I'm sure Lady Lannister was also incredibly sad that her husband's favorite mistress and their daughters were also taken by the Ironborn. The Ironborn moved on to take Case and Fair Isle, where the Red Kraken claimed 4 of Lord Farman's daughters as salt wives, and was very charitable in giving the 5th and homely one to his brother, Varan. This all has a sorta happy ending though. In Fair Castle, the Red Kraken's throat was slit with his own dagger by a girl named Tess, who then threw herself in the ocean afterwards, but that's okay. What's important is within hours, Fair Isle was free of the Ironborn once again. However, let's go back to the Dance of the Dragons. Poor Sir Tywin would also suffer for his relationship with Aegon II during this war. Being the master of coins and loyal to Aegon II, before Rhaenyra took King's Landing, he had hidden the greater part of the crown's gold. When she finally took King's Landing and Tywin as prisoner, she tortured him cruelly. She blinded him, she gelded him, she mutilated him, and still, he refused to talk, refused to tell her where the crown's wealth was hidden. And if you're thinking he sounds badass, it gets better. When Aegon II took the city back, they found the mutilated Lannister. His wits were completely intact despite what had been done to him. So Aegon II kept him as master of coin, and in his last days of rule, even trusted Tywin enough to send him to the Free Cities in search of sellswords to fight against Rhaenyra's son, Aegon. In the end, that really didn't matter, as Aegon II was poisoned and Aegon III came to the throne. He was 11, so a regency was needed, and Tywin Lannister was decided to be his hand to the king. Some maesters speculate that not only was it to help heal wounds, but his enemies thought a blind maimed man to be no threat to them. But Tywin continued to be amazing. He served wonderfully for 2 years before dying of the winter fever in 133 AC. The Lannisters are made of some tough stuff. Now, remember Lord Jason's widow, Lady Johanna? A year later in 134 AC, that kick-ass widow would sail to the Iron Islands with the Lord Admiral of the Reach, Sir Leo Costaigne, and wreck their shit, including taking one of Dalton's salt sons, removing his manhood, and making him a fool at Casterly Rock. She also lent money to King's Landing to rebuild after the war. The Lannisters, and by extension the Westerlands, continued to support the Targaryens over the years. When Daemon Blackfyre, bastard son of Aegon IV, decided he should have the throne, not his firstborn half-brother, the First Blackfyre Rebellion began in 196 AC. But supporting the Targaryens again caused more strife for House Lannister. Daemon Blackfyre and his rebels won some victories in the Westerlands, including heavily hitting Lannisport and the Golden Tooth. Sir Quentin Ball was particularly a thorn in the Westerlands and Lannister's side when he killed Lord Lefford and then sent Lord Daemon Lannister, later to be known as the Grey Lion, into retreat. Thankfully, in about a year, the First Blackfyre Rebellion was put down and Daemon Blackfyre was killed. After Lord Daemon died in 210 AC, the Westerlands saw his son, Tybalt, to succeed him as the new Lord of Casterly Rock. But someone had their hand in the poison jar. He died after ruling for only 2 years, and he only left behind a 3-year-old daughter, Surreal, as an heir. Given her young, tender age, Tybalt's brother, the child's uncle, Gerald, served as regent for the girl. However, tragedy struck again, and the Lady of Casterly Rock, the poor tender 3-year-old, died suddenly, as nieces of power-hungry uncles tend to do. This meant the Westerlands, the Rock, and all the wealth and power of House Lannister now passed to Lord Gerald. I'm sure he was completely shocked by this development. But hey, even though he probably killed his brother and little niece, the guy was still a great warden of the West. He was clever, shrewd, able, and fair-minded. Yeah, people gossiped that he killed his niece and brother, but under his rule for 31 years, the Westerlands and House Lannister increased immensely in wealth, power, and trade. He was such a great ruler, he became known as Gerald the Golden. But given the time and belief that the gods will always punish you for kinslaying, some bad things happened in his life that made people sure he had actually murdered his family members. First, in 230 AC, his much-loved second wife, Lady Rohan, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, less than a year after giving birth to his 4th son, Jason. The Peak Uprising, which saw the death of King Maekar Targaryen, also hurt the Westerlands, causing dire effects during Gerald's time as Lord of Casterly Rock. In 233 AC, the Lannisters fought to end the Peak Rebellion, and Lord Gerald lost the eldest of his twin sons, Tywald, while he squired for Lord Robert Raine of Castamere. Lord Robert also died, leaving his eldest son, Sir Roger Rayne, the Red Lion, as his heir. Tywin had been betrothed to the Red Lion's young sister, Lady Ellen. Lady Ellen was a spirited young woman, strong-willed, hot-tempered, and had been dreaming of becoming Lady of Casterly Rock. With Gerald's heir and her betrothed dead, that dream seemed to be dying, but she would have none of that. Instead, she persuaded his twin brother, Tywin, the new heir of Casterly Rock, to rid of his own betrothal to the daughter of Lord Rowan of Golden Grove, and instead marry her. By the time this happened, Lord Gerald was too old, too full of grief and illness, and was but a pale shadow of his former self. He opposed the match, but eventually he gave way, and in 235 AC, there was a double wedding at Casterly Rock. Ellen Raine was married to Sir Tywin, and his younger brother Tytos was wed to Jane Marbrand, the daughter of Lord Alan Marbrand of Ashmark. After the wedding, Ellen became Lady of Casterly Rock in all but name. Lord Gerald was too old, and being twice the widower, he chose not to remarry. The Grey Lion stayed in his bedchamber and read his books while the new Lady of Casterly Rock held splendid court, held many magnificent tourney and balls, and filled the rock with musicians, mummers, artists, and of course, her own family, the Raines. Having the power she always craved meant she could pass it on to her own family, and her brothers Roger and Renard were always close by as honors, lands, and offices were showered on them and their cousins, nephews, uncles, and nieces. It grew so bad that the aged fool of Lord Gerald, called Lord Toad, was heard to have said, "Lady Ellen must surely be a sorceress, for she has made it rain inside the rock all year." But in time this would change. In 236 AC, the Fourth Blackfire Rebellion began. If you're wondering about the Second Blackfire Rebellion, it was a total flop, but I have a really old video on it that I'll link below. If you're wondering about the Third Blackfire Rebellion, it was a bit more fun, but not really important for the Westerlands. Also, I'll have a link for that in the comment section below. So that Fourth Blackfire Rebellion was led by the pretender Daemon Blackfire III. Daemon crossed the Narrow Sea and landed at Massey Hook with Bittersteel and the Golden Company at his back. He was sure he would take the Iron Throne. King Aegon V, affectionately known as Egg, summoned his lords, including Lord Lannister and the Westerlands, to oppose Daemon III. The rebellion ended quickly at the Battle of Wendwater Bridge, with Daemon losing many, and the Royalists losing fewer than 100 men. However, Tywin Lannister, heir of Casterly Rock and the second of Gerald's twins, was killed in battle. For whatever reason, this didn't plunge the Grey Lion further into grief, but instead put a fire in him. Tywin's body was laid to rest in Casterly Rock, and Sir Gerald took firm control of the Westerlands and did his best to prepare his third-born son, Tytos, a weak-willed and unpromising child, to succeed him. In doing this, he first set out to end the reign of the Raines, making Lady Ellen's brothers leave Casterly Rock along with many other of her family. Though Lady Ellen stayed at Casterly Rock, her power faded, and the power of Lord Tytos' wife, Jane, only grew. Of course, Lady Ellen, who only ever wanted to be Lady of Casterly Rock, was in a tizzy that her husband had died, and his younger brother Tytos was now the heir. That meant Lady Jane would one day be Lady of Casterly Rock officially, and she was not okay with that. A bitter rivalry began between the two women. Lady Ellen was so desperate to be Lady of Casterly Rock that in 239 AC, she tried to sleep with Tytos, urging him to cast aside his wife and marry her instead. Tytos, as you will learn in part 5, was just a total wimp. He was 19 and found Lady Ellen to be so intimidating, he couldn't get it up, and this led the humiliated man to run back to his wife and confess what had happened and beg for her forgiveness. Lady Jane was forgiving, letting go what her young husband had done, but she did inform Lord Gerald of what had happened. Gerald was furious and wanted to be done with Lady Ellen for good, so he found her a new husband, sending ravens and making a quick match. Within a fortnight, Ellen was married to a red-faced Waldron Tarbeck, Lord of Tarbeck Hall, a 55-year-old widowed lord of an honorable, ancient, and impoverished house. Lady Ellen left Casterly Rock with Lord Tarbeck to never return. However, the rivalry between the two women remained and seemed to intensify through what was dubbed the War of the Wombs. Though Lady Ellen had not given her last husband an heir, she was able to give Waldron Tarbeck a son and 2 daughters. Lady Jane, not to be outdone, gave birth to a son named Tywin. Legend states that when Lord Gerald, the child's grandfather, ruffled the baby's golden hair, baby Tywin bit his finger. Though other children would follow for Tytos and Jane, Tywin was the only grandchild Gerald ever met. In 244 AC, Gerald died of a bad bladder, being unable to pass water. At the age of 24, Tytos Lannister, his eldest surviving son, became Warden of the West, Shield of Lannisport, and Lord of Casterly Rock. Titles he was not ready for, nor should have ever had. But before I dog on him too much, let's talk about Tytos' good qualities. The man was very, very slow to anger. Pretty good for being a ruler of a territory. He was also quick to forgive and saw the good in every person, regardless of their status. He was such a good-natured, happy man that he was nicknamed the Laughing Lion. And when he laughed, the West laughed with him. For a time. It is important for your people to love you, yes, but more so respect you. When you bend over backwards to get your people to love you, it often leads to them taking advantage of you and secretly, and sometimes not so secretly, looking down on you. As a maester said about Tytos, his lordship only wants to be loved. So he laughs and takes no offense and forgives and bestows honors and offices and lavish gifts on those who mock him and defy him, thinking thereby to win their loyalty. Yet the more he laughs and gives, the more they despise him. Tytos was just far too trusting, too soft, too weak-willed, and too indecisive to rule effectively. He disliked war, and instead of acting on insults and threats, he would laugh them away when most of his ancestors would have had their swords out. This weak-willed and forgiving nature made him ripe to be taken advantage of. Many saw Tytos' rule as the perfect time to claim wealth, land, and power. His people began to borrow heavily from Casterly Rock and had no fear in not repaying the loans. Lord Tytos would simply extend the debts or forgive them, so why should they fear not paying back the lions? When others of the Westerlands caught wind of Tytos' generosity, people, even common merchants, began to flock to the rock, begging for loans and taking vast amounts of gold. Because the Lord's people had such little fear and respect for him, corruption also began to spread throughout the Westerlands as his decrees and rules were largely ignored. In fact, disrespecting the Lord of Casterly Rock became a game called Twisting the Lion's Tail. Young knights and some squires tried to outdo each other as they attempted to twist the lion tail the hardest. At feasts and balls, guests would feel free to mock Tytos, even sometimes to his face. They joked about toothless lions. In his need to be loved, no one laughed louder at these jokes and insults than Lord Lannister himself. As you can imagine, such a weak and ineffective ruler led to the weakening of House Lannister and the rise of other Westerland houses. Less than 10 years into his rule, and even lords outside the Westerlands began to become aware that the Lannisters were no longer to be feared. Late in 252 AC, Tytos agreed to marry his 7-year-old daughter, his precious little Princess Jenna, to a younger son of Walder Frey. He announced this at a feast with half the Westerlands in attendance. With the announcement, Lady Ellen Tarback laughed aloud, and Lord Roger Rayne left the hall in anger. Tytos apparently knew how to put his foot down with his children at this point, because even though Tywin, only 10 years old, criticized the betrothal in fierce words, Lord Lannister still went through with the betrothal, though his face did turn white when his son expressed his anger. Shortly after this, Tytos sent Tywin to King's Landing to be a cupbearer at King Aegon's court. Then his second-born son, Kevin, was sent to Castamere to serve as a page and then squire. Now, during Tytos' time as Lord of Casterly Rock, the reigns of Castamere were slowly becoming an issue. They were a rich, old, and powerful house, and this only grew under Tytos' rule. Castamere at this time was controlled by Roger Rayne, the Red Lion, who was considered the deadliest sword in the Westerlands and widely feared for his skill at arms. His brother was just as dangerous, but in a far different way. Sir Reynard Rayne was incredibly charming and cunning. Together, the brothers made an impressive team. To make them even more dangerous, House Rayne's close allies, the Tarbecks, were growing in strength after centuries of slow decline, thanks to Lady Ellen Rayne, now Lady Tarback. Though she wasn't able to go to the Rock herself, she worked with the Red Lion to get vast amounts of gold from Tytos, knowing the man would not be able to refuse Lord Rayne. With this money, Lady Ellen, always after wealth and status, restored the crumbling ruins of Tarback Hall, rebuilding its curtained wall, furnishing its keep to rival any castle in the west, and strengthening its towers. Unfortunately, in 255 AC, Tytos would finally lose the nickname the Laughing Lion, only due to tragedy. His loved wife, Lady Jane, gave birth to their fourth son, Geryon, but she didn't recover from the labor, and within a month, his wife was dead. The loss of his wife destroyed the man, and if he was perceived as a poor ruler before, now he was downright terrible. In the years after her death, the Westerlands fell into one of the worst states they had ever been in since the Lannisters took control. Bandits and outlaws roamed the Westerlands, and more so than before, House Lannister's bannermen ignored Tytos and only took care of themselves. Even King Aegon V sent his own knights to the Westerlands 3 times to try to restore order because of how bad conditions were becoming. But this was very ineffective. As soon as King Aegon's men left, the conflicts would just start again. In 259 AC, when King Aegon died and the new king, Jaehaerys II, was too busy with the War of the Nine-Penny Kings to pay attention to the Westerlands, and also he wasn't as nearly strong-willed as his father Aegon, the Westerlands just continued to go downhill. But with the War of the Nine-Penny Kings came the chance for Tytos' 3 eldest boys, Tywin, Kevan, and Tyget, to prove themselves. Though Tytos, hating war and fighting and still depressed, didn't go, he gave his brother Jason Lannister command of 11,000 Westerland forces. And while his brother and sons were fighting on the Stepstones, Tytos became attracted to a woman of low birth that served as a wet nurse for his youngest son. On the Stepstones, Sir Jason died in battle on Bloodstone in 260 AC, resulting in Sir Roger Rayne seizing control of the Westermen and leading them to many notable victories. Now Tytos' 3 boys became hardened warriors during this conflict. Tywin was knighted on the eve of the conflict and fought with Jaehaerys' young heir, Aerys, Prince of Dragonstone. By the end of the war, Tywin would knight Aerys himself. Tytos' second-born, Kevan, also proved himself while squiring for the Red Lion, and was knighted by Lord Rayne. While the third boy, Tyget, was too young to be knighted, he was still impressive for his age. He killed a grown man in his first battle and 3 more in later fights, including a Knight of the Golden Company. Tyget's courage and skill at arms would be noticed by all, according to maesters. So you can imagine when the 3 boys got back from the war after forming bonds with not only fellow Westermen, but lords from all over the realm, they were a bit changed. The boys were very aware of the low regard the other lords had for their father, Tytos. Tywin, always a strong-willed person, decided he was going to restore the power and pride of Casterly Rock in House Lannister, even though he wasn't Lord of Casterly Rock yet. Tytos protested feebly and then retreated to his wet nurse lover while Tywin set out to fix the Westerlands. And he did a fantastic job, but I'll talk about Tywin in his own video. What is important for Tytos' video is that Tywin demanded repayment of all loans given out by Tytos. If they couldn't pay, they needed to send hostages to Casterly Rock until payment was given. This led to Lord Tarbeck heading to Casterly Rock, believing he could get Lord Tytos to take back what his son Tywin was doing. Unfortunately for Lord Tarbeck, Tywin, not Tytos, was there to greet the man and decided to swiftly put him in the Rock's dungeon. Lady Tarbeck, Ellen, always a thorn in the Lannister side due to her personal ambition, responded by sending her own knights to capture 3 Lannisters. Stafford Lannister, a young squire and eldest son of Lord Tytos' dead brother Jason, and 2 Lannisters from Lannisport. This was enough to stir Tytos from his wet nurse lover to overrule his hard-headed son's decree. Though Tywin suggested sending Lord Tarbeck back to his wife, Lady Ellen, in 3 pieces, 1 for every Lannister she took, the soft-hearted Tytos ordered the release of Lord Tarbeck unharmed, apologized to the man, and forgave his debts. Tywin, utterly pissed off with his father for reversing what he had done, did not attend the exchanging of hostages, so instead, Sir Kevan went. Kevan returned Lord Tarbeck, and Lady Tarbeck returned the Lannisters she had held hostage. At Casimir, Lord Rayne threw a huge feast with Lannisters and Tarbecks toasting each other, exchanging kisses and gifts, and vowing to be faithful friends through all eternity. Tywin's definition of eternity is a bit different than most people's, though. Less than a year later, late in 261 AC, the stubborn heir demanded that Roger and Reynard Rayne, and Lord and Lady Tarbeck, answer for their crimes. They decided, nah, and revolted against the Lannisters, which was all part of Tywin's plan. And I talked about the reigns of Casimir and Tywin eradicating the Tarbecks and Raynes in another video, but I will also talk about them again in Tywin's own video. For this video on Tytos, all you need to know is Tywin destroyed House Tarbeck and Rain and made their houses extinct, whether Lord Tytos wanted it or not. Though he should have thanked his son, as none of the other Westerland lords gave Tytos any more problems for the rest of his rule due to that event. Tytos' heir was then summoned to King's Landing in 262 AC by King Aerys II after his father Jaehaerys died. Now King Aerys decided he wanted his boyhood friend and man that had knighted him on the Stepstones as his hand. Tywin was only 20 years old and the youngest hand of the king when he went to King's Landing to answer his king's summons. While Tywin was away in King's Landing, Tytos would create House Clegane when his life was saved by his kennel master. One autumn, sometime after the year 262 AC, Lord Tytos was out in his lands. Tytos made the mistake of getting between a lioness and her prey, and the lioness didn't seem to care she was the Lannisters' own sigil. The lioness attacked Lord Tytos, tearing into his horse, seeking to get to him. The lioness may have succeeded if not for the quick thinking of the Lord's kennel master. The kennel master came to the location, releasing the hounds to rescue Tytos and give him a chance. In his struggle to keep his lord alive, the kennel master lost a leg and 3 of his dogs died. However, the dogs did their job and were able to run the lioness off without harm to their lord. Lord Tytos, as we know, a generous, kind man, rewarded the kennel master for his bravery, quick thinking, and saving his life despite the consequences. The Lord of Casterly Rock gave the man lands, a tower house, and took his son as a squire. The kennel master, to honor the dogs that died and the ones that helped him earn this reward, created a sigil for his house. 3 dogs for the 3 that died, on a banner of yellow for the autumn grass they fought in. The kennel master became the first knight of House Clegane, and he would become the grandfather of Sandor Clegane one day. In 267 AC, Tytos, grown very fat, would die after suffering a heart attack as he climbed a steep flight of stairs to see his new mistress, this time a candlemaker's daughter. A woman his sons considered one step above a whore who had helped herself to their dead mother's clothes, jewels, and who had been ordering around their household knights, sitting in attendance when Tytos was absent, and dismissing servants. With Tytos' death, she was quickly taught a lesson by Tywin, who did not appreciate yet another person making a fool of his house. He stripped the woman naked and paraded her through Lannisport to the docks like a common whore for a fortnight, making her confess to every man she met that she was a thief and a harlot. Though no man laid a hand on her, people that had called themselves her friends abandoned her, and she lost all power thanks to Tywin. So, in 267 AC, Tytos' heir, Tywin, became the new lord of Casterly Rock. Despite all the ways Tytos may have disappointed his children, the man did love them dearly, and he made sure to leave his 5 kids a generous inheritance. Under Tywin, House Lannister would rise in power and respect. He would lead the Westerlands into a golden age, and though his people never really loved him, they would respect him. And Tywin was aware that the small folk didn't exactly love him. He knew that the small folk claimed his heart was old, hard, and gold. And gold in Tywin would be a continuous joke with people, some being stupid enough to loudly say that Tywin shit gold or had shit flecked with gold. One such fool, who said the latter, was punished severely for the joke, with some saying the man was still alive, deep in the bowels of Casterly Rock. How many men did Tywin punish for these jokes is unclear. However, because of his new appointment to Warden of the West, Tywin, Aerys II, Rhaegar, and half the court went to the Westerlands the year Tytos died, and remained there for most the next year. When the court finally went back to King's Landing, it was obvious there was tension between Aerys and Tywin, and their relationship was not the same. The friendship between them was breaking down, and where Aerys had previously sided with him, he was now taking every opportunity to argue with him. When Tywin wanted neutrality during a trade war between Volantis against Myr and Tyrosh, Aerys thought there was an advantage to supplying gold and arms to Volantis. When Tywin settled a border dispute between House Bracken and House Blackwood by siding with the Blackwoods, Aerys overruled him and gave a disputed mill to Lord Bracken. And the stupidity didn't stop there. Aerys decided to double port fees at King's Landing and Old Town, and triple them at Lannisport and other ports and harbors of the realm. This was despite Tywin's strong objections. When merchants and small lords complained before the Iron Throne, Aerys went full asshole and blamed the hand for it, saying, "Lord Tywin shits gold, but of late he's been constipated and had to find other ways to fill our coffers." Aerys restored the tariffs and port fees, earning himself praise and Tywin criticism. That didn't mean Tywin stopped being an effective hand, though. See, the problem was Tywin was too good at ruling, and people noticed. There were talks that Tywin ruled the Seven Kingdoms and told King Aerys what to do since the beginning, and those talks only became more frequent. Most were smart enough to keep these talks quiet, but Aerys became very aware of the belief he was a hollow figurehead, and Tywin was the master of the Seven Kingdoms. The king was convinced he could disprove these rumors and humble his overmighty servant and put him back in his place. Too bad for Aerys, Tywin truly was meant to rule, and putting him in his place was harder than he thought. Tywin was just smart, politically intelligent, listened before he spoke, quiet in council until he felt ready to speak, and in general, fantastic at what he did. Tywin was so splendid that sometimes people that didn't know better thought he was actually the king. One example of that occurred in 268 AC, when Stannis and Robert Baratheon were taken to Aerys II's court by their father. Both Robert and Stannis agreed afterwards that the king had been as noble as the dragons were fearsome, only to learn years later that who they thought was the king was actually Tywin. It turned out Aerys had cut himself on the throne that morning, and the hand had taken his place. However, let's go back to Aerys being an absolute asshole to Tywin. There are many examples of how Aerys went out of his way to just hurt Tywin. In the beginning of their relationship as king and hand, Aerys had always listened to Tywin when he recommended offices, honors, and inheritance to certain people. After 270 AC, this changed. Aerys began to ignore Tywin's recommendations, and many Westermen would find themselves dismissed from the king's service under suspicion of being one of Tywin's men. Aerys delivered a nice slap to Tywin's face when the king refused to name Tywin's brother, Tyget, Master-at-Arms of the Red Keep, and gave the post to another person. Not that Aerys giving someone a position meant much. Even when the king gave a position, usually to his favorites, it could be taken away just as quick due to his highly suspicious nature. In 272 AC, Tywin's children came to King's Landing with their mother for the anniversary tourney to celebrate Aerys' 10th year on the throne. Aerys, being the smooth operator he was, asked Joanna if nursing her children had ruined her breasts that once were so high and mighty. Joanna was humiliated as those around Aerys snickered. Tywin was so outraged by the insult that he resigned his hand the next day, but Aerys refused to allow him to, perhaps feeling it was safer to keep the man close. And also probably because he enjoyed mocking him. Or having others mock him. Many learned the quickest way to advance was to make fun of Tywin. Those that made jokes at Tywin's expense often found themselves in the king's favor and granted positions, lands, and gold. Tywin, despite this humiliation aimed at him, suffered in silence. Interestingly, despite his anger towards Aerys, Tywin still promised his daughter that one day she would marry Rhaegar, telling her to never speak of it until Aerys II agreed to the betrothal. If we can believe Cersei, he also would give her one of his secret smiles he only gave to her. Unfortunately, in 273 AC, Tywin lost his other half when his wife died giving birth to a deformed child named Tyrion, something he blamed on the boy for the rest of his life. With her death, all happiness was taken from Tywin. Those closest to him claim that on that day, the best part of Tywin died with his wife, which must be true because after her death, he never smiled again. Of course, Tywin's despair probably wasn't helped by the rumors that immediately began to fly about his deformed child, with people saying he had a stiff curly tail like a swine's, a monstrous huge head that was half again the size of his body, with thick black hair and a beard, an evil eye and teeth so long he couldn't close his mouth, lion's claws, and lastly, both a vagina and penis. To make matters worse, in Tywin's days of grief, some said he deserved his wife's death and the deformed son that came with it. Lord Tywin's Doom and Lord Tywin's Bane became the name for his son around the realm. One begging brother preached that Tywin had made himself greater than King Aerys, but only a god is meant to stand above a king. His son was his curse and a punishment sent by the gods to teach him that he was no better than any other man. Ares himself was heard to say, "The gods cannot abide such arrogance. They have plucked a fair flower from his hand and given him a monster in her place to teach him some humility at last." Which, again, a man is grieving the loss of his wife. That's a pretty fucked up thing to openly be saying. Though if we're being honest, Tywin kinda thought the same thing. He considered Tyrion ill-made, devious, disobedient, and a spiteful little creature full of lust, envy, and low cunning. And that men's laws gave him the right to bear Tywin's name and display his colors. But it was the gods that brought forth Tyrion to teach him humility and to condemn him to watching his youngest waddle about wearing the proud lion. Shortly after his wife's death, the Princess of Dorne and her consort visited with her 2 children. As you can imagine, the timing wasn't great, and Tywin was still in grief. Upon arriving at Casterly Rock, Tywin ignored the family the entire time they were there, after he commanded his brother, Kevan Lannister, to entertain them. Oberyn Martell remembers being given a cell that was dark and windowless, much like a dungeon, but with a feather bed and Myrish carpets. When Princess Martell had waited as long as was decent, she talked about marriages with Tywin. Lord Tywin refused, saying his daughter Cersei was meant for Rhaegar. When she asked about Jaime, Tywin offered Tyrion instead. This offer she took for an outrage, so she left without any marriage arrangements. And Tywin would try to make a lot of marriage arrangements for his deformed and hated son over the years. To Lysa Tully, though that was due to a betrothal between Jaime and her not working out, Lord Jon Royce and Leighton Hightower's daughter, even a woman that had been deflowered by Robert Baratheon. Everyone equally considered it an insult. But let's go back to talking about Aerys and Tywin returning to King's Landing to continue to serve as Hand. At around 31 years old, Tywin had suffered through his father's misrule, restored the Westerlands, and effectively governed the entire realm. While his relationship with Aerys II had been strained before Aerys made the cruel remarks about his dead wife I talked about in part 2, after those remarks, any kind of relationship between the two men was destroyed. However, despite all this, Tywin continued to serve. Tywin knew what Aerys and others had said about him and the death of his wife, but he made no show of emotion over it. Aerys, especially with no affection between the two men, himself would continue to humiliate Tywin, despite the man being largely responsible for the peace and prosperity the Seven Kingdoms experienced. Yet Lord Tywin endured as Aerys became even more violent and suspicious. Around the time of Tywin's wife's death, the king began to pay rewards for lies, tales of treason, real or not, and any kind of whisper. At the same time, he made those that criticized him pay. Payne, the captain of the Hand's Guards, was heard boasting about Tywin being the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and to that, Aerys II, already pissed at the wide-held belief Tywin ruled the realm and he was simply a hollow figurehead, took Payne's tongue. There are doubtless many other examples of Aerys punishing someone for saying anything positive about Tywin. Of course, at the same time, it's still paid to mock Tywin or make jokes at the man's expense. Doing so still awarded someone the favor of the king, even if that favor was incredibly fickle. Despite all this, Tywin still had hopes for his house's future, and in 276 AC, Tywin threw a huge tourney in honor of Aerys' second son, Viserys' birth. This was a huge deal, as after Rhaegar, Aerys' wife, had struggled with miscarriages and stillbirth for years, he finally had another son. However, this birth also made Aerys even more paranoid and obsessive, fearing the child would die or be killed. Because of this, Aerys and Rhaegar went to the tourney Tywin threw. Aerys had to be convinced, of course, but he made his wife and their new child stay at King's Landing. But at the tourney, the small folk cheered twice as loud for Tywin, then they cheered for their king, but only half as loudly for Tywin as they cheered for Prince Rhaegar. Tywin's daughter Cersei, only 10, was also present at this tourney and couldn't help but stare at Prince Rhaegar, the man her father had promised she would wed. At 17, the prince was newly knighted and managed to take down 2 of Tywin's brothers, along with a dozen of Tywin's finest jousters. During this tourney, Tywin finally brought up the marriage proposal between his daughter and Rhaegar, believing it was time for Rhaegar to marry. But Aerys refused, telling Tywin he was a good and valuable servant, yet a servant, nonetheless, basically saying his daughter wasn't good enough for his son. To add a double insult, Aerys also refused to appoint Tywin's son Jaime as his son Rhaegar's squire. These two things, along with all the other tension between the men in the first place, made it by the end of the tourney that only cold silences and chilly looks were given between the two men. Interestingly, it's also around this time Cersei remembers hearing her father tell Jaime, when he was no older than 10, that love wasn't necessary. He told his son, "You cannot eat love, nor buy a horse with it, nor warm your halls on a cold night." Obviously a great thing to tell a 10-year-old. The next year, in 277 AC, things took a turn for the worse when Aerys II decided to further act like a spoiled child. Dennis Darkland, Lord of Duskendale, had become quite upset that his town, an important port on Blackwater Bay, had its wealth and trade shrink due to King's Landing being nearby. Lord Darkland tried to win a charter for his town, as Dorne had done before, but the hand of the king just wouldn't allow it. This pissed Lord Darkland off, and he stopped paying taxes and requested his proposal be heard again. King Aerys II, in all his wisdom, decided to go to Duskendale to hear Lord Darkland's proposal, despite Tywin saying, "Hey, yeah, that's a trap, you shouldn't go." But King Aerys II was trying to prove he could deal with the problem without Tywin's input or help, and went with only one Kingsguard, Sir Gawain Gaunt, and a small escort. Oh look, it was a trap. Sir Gawain was slain, and Aerys II was taken as a prisoner. For half a year, King Aerys was held in the dungeons of Duskendale, where he was incredibly mistreated. Tywin in turn sat outside Duskendale with a great host he had gathered by sending out riders and ravens that could storm the town at any time. But Lord Darkland warned if Tywin Lannister did such a thing, the king would die. The small council didn't think the Lord would actually kill Aerys, but Tywin refused to risk it. Instead, he used his host to surround Duskendale, blocking it by land and sea. Lord Darkland did attempt several parleys, but Tywin refused to hear him, demanding for his complete and unconditional surrender of the town and castle and the release of the king. After half a year, Tywin gave the Lord one last chance to surrender. If he refused, Tywin would storm the town and put every man, woman, and child to the sword. Unsupported records state that Tywin sent a bard with these terms to sing the Rains of Castamere as well, but, you know, who can say for sure? George. At this ultimatum, several of the small council members urged Tywin not to attack the town and risk their king, that the Lord would surely kill Aerys. However, Tywin, again allegedly, fired back, "He may or he may not, but if he does, we have a better king right here," indicating Aerys II's son, Rhaegar. And there is a disagreement on Tywin's motives here. While some think Tywin believed Lord Darkland would simply back down, others believe he was willing and eager to see Aerys II die so his son could take the Iron Throne. We'll never know the outcome of that, as before he could put that plan in motion, Barristan Selmy offered another solution. The knight would enter the town in secret to rescue the king. Tywin believed this plan bordered on madness, but out of respect for the courage and prowess of Sir Barristan, he gave him a day to attempt the plan. But if he failed and wasn't back by dawn the following day, Tywin would storm Duskendale. It was the hour of the wolf when Barristan began his rescue attempt, and it was the hour of the wolf when he completed it. After breaking Aerys out of the dungeon and racing through the streets of Duskendale, they finally came to the town's walls and raced up them as Tywin ordered his archers to clear it of defenders. Finally, Aerys was back with his hand and out of danger. With his hostage gone, Lord Darkland knew it was over, and instead of having his town taken by Tywin, he bent the knee and begged for mercy. He didn't get it. Aerys II extinguished the Darkland line. He also killed all of House Hollard except for one boy, and that was only because Sir Barristan asked for the boy's life to be spared. And oh boy, if you thought Aerys and Tywin had problems before the Defiance, you have not seen anything yet. What was left of Aerys' sanity was gone after this event, and his madness grew every year at a crazy rate. Aerys wouldn't allow himself to be touched or washed anymore, and he refused to cut his hair or trim his nails. Only the Kingsguard could have a sword in his presence, and his decision-making and punishments became erratic and much more harsh. Aerys' suspicions of Tywin grew out of control, and he began to believe Tywin was conspiring with the prince and others to kill him. To get rid of Tywin, Aerys sent Steffon Baratheon to find a wife for Rhaegar in Essos. It was believed that once Lord Baratheon succeeded, Tywin would be removed from office, arrested, and tried for high treason. This plan didn't come to fruition as Steffon was unable to find a bride for Rhaegar and died on his way back home when his ship sank. Aerys was convinced Tywin arranged Lord Baratheon's murder and feared that if he dismissed him as Hand, he would kill him too. He began to live in constant fear of what Tywin might do next, and he no longer met with Tywin unless all 7 Kingsguard were present, certain everyone was plotting against him, most of all, Tywin. Because of this madness and paranoia, Aerys brought a master of whisperers from across the narrow sea, Varys. Tywin never liked Varys, but there was nothing he could do about him. To make matters worse, Tywin was also having trouble with his children, more specifically, Tyrion. Tyrion was a source of constant anger for Tywin, and while he kept the boy in his home, it was only because the honor of his house and image required it. When Tyrion was around 6, a few years after the Defiance of Duskendale, his uncle taught him tumbling. Tyrion was eager to learn, and for half a year he cartwheeled around Casterly Rock, making others smile at his antics. Even his sister Cersei, who absolutely despised him, laughed a time or two. However, when Tywin came to Casterly Rock for a visit from King's Landing, that all stopped. At supper that night, Tyrion surprised Tywin by walking the length of the table on his hands. Tywin was not amused and scolded his youngest son. "The gods made you a dwarf. Must you be a fool as well? You were born a lion, not a monkey." And so that fun stopped. A little while afterwards, Tywin brought his daughter Cersei to court, and King Aerys threw a feast for her. At the feast, Lord Riker, upon hearing Merryweather talk about raising the duty of wine, said, "If we need gold, his grace should sit Lord Tywin on his chamber pot." While the king and his lickspittles laughed, Tywin only stared at Riker over his wine cup. After the laughter died, Tywin continued to stare the man down. Finally, Lord Riker turned away, turned back, met Tywin's eyes, ignored them, drank a tankard of ale, and then stalked off, red-faced. Though Tywin intimidated men like this incident, and Aerys was also terrified of Tywin, the joke still remained. But as always, Tywin endured. But with Cersei at court, and heck, even with his children in the Westerlands, they unfortunately heard the awful things people said about their father. They knew that people said Tywin loved gold most of all, implying also more so than his own children, and that he shit gold. But he did teach his kids many things while being busy as the Hand and being the butt of others' jokes, and also told them that governing the realm came first as a reason he wasn't always there. He also taught them that a good threat was often more telling than a blow, and that one man on a wall was worth 10 beneath it. And also the men in the City Watch weren't truly soldiers, but that's probably more of a bias. Because of the high esteem his children held for Tywin, they had unrealistic views of him as well. For example, Cersei believed that after her mother died, Tywin never touched a woman again and was simply above whores. Though of course Tywin helped put forth that image by making sure people didn't see him with any. So again, the day-to-day ruling of the realm continued, and Tywin stayed as Aerys' faithful hand. It wasn't until 281 AC when Aerys made Tywin's son and heir, a 15-year-old Jaime, a knight of the Kingsguard, that Tywin was simply done. As a Kingsguard, Jaime would have to give up his claim to Casterly Rock. This robbed Tywin of his golden heir, and knowing Aerys wanted to use his son as a hostage against him as he grew more fearful of the Lion Lord, Tywin was outraged. Not only that, but Tywin had been in the middle of making a marriage pact for Jaime, and suddenly he looked foolish and false. This was too much for Lord Lannister and led Tywin to resigning in 281 AC. Pleading illness, which Aerys eagerly accepted. Tywin finally went back to the Westerlands with his daughter to stay. So knowing all this, it shouldn't be surprising that when Robert's rebellion began a year later and Aerys called upon Tywin for help, Tywin stayed silent and remained at Casterly Rock. He did hear about Aerys' new Hands of the King, though. Unsurprisingly, after Tywin, Aerys II went through an assortment of hands. Hard to be an advisor to a crazy asshole. While we don't have major details on how Lord Lannister felt about all his replacement hands, we know that Tywin commented on at least 2 of them. First, Merryweather, who Tywin said was only good for chuckling at Aerys' witticisms, and Jon Cunnington, a young man that was arrogant, able, and energetic. When Jon's position reached Tywin at Casterly Rock, Tywin declared, "Too soon. Cunnington is too young, too bold, too eager for glory." Besides that, Tywin continued to sit at Casterly Rock quietly. It wasn't until after Robert Baratheon had killed Rhaegar on the Trident that Tywin moved his forces to King's Landing. Pretending to be there to aid the Mad King and professing his loyalty, Aerys thought he was rescued when he saw his old hand outside the gate with 12,000 men. Instead, when he was let in, the Westermen sacked the city and Tywin's son killed the Mad King. But as always, and as you learned in all these parts, Tywin always has to take it a step further. Upon arriving at the Red Keep, Tywin ordered Gregor Clegane and Amori Lorch, knights sworn to Tywin, to kill Rhaegar's children. Ilya Martell wasn't included in those orders, according to Tywin, but who knows if that was a lie. After the children were killed, Tywin wrapped their bodies in the crimson cloaks of the Lannisters and showed them to Robert Baratheon as a token of loyalty. According to Tywin, there was a strategy in this. He said, "We had come late to Robert's cause. It was necessary to demonstrate our loyalty. When I laid those bodies before the throne, no man could doubt that we had forsaken House Targaryen forever." And Robert's relief was palpable. As stupid as he was, even he knew that Rhaegar's children had to die if his throne was ever to be secure. Yet he saw himself as a hero, and heroes do not kill children. Besides his dealings with Rhaegar's children and sacking the city, Tywin gave those that fought for the crown a choice: take the black, or their heads would be on a spike. Because of all this, at the end of Robert's rebellion, Tywin earned even more hatred. Obviously, the murder of Ilya and her children earned the hatred of House Martell, and the population of King's Landing did not appreciate Tywin betraying Aerys and sacking the city. And then those loyal to the crown didn't like being told that they had to take the black or die. However, Tywin had assured his family's place in power with his actions, and that's all he cared about. To tie House Lannister to House Baratheon and the Iron Throne, Cersei was married to Robert, and Tywin finally made his daughter a queen. Robert was assured that with Cersei Lannister married to him, if Viserys Targaryen ever came back to win his father's throne, Tywin would choose Robert due to his wife. With his daughter now the wife of the king, Tywin returned home to Casterly Rock, where he remained as Warden of the West. All was peaceful for the most part, with Tywin staying at Casterly Rock. Mostly. During Robert's rule, Tywin would loan massive amounts of gold to the crown, putting King's Landing's court in debt over 3 million gold dragons, due to Robert spending like a drunk sailor. He would also visit the location from time to time. There's one particular visit that stands out when Robert feasted Tywin. A black cat, said to be older than Sin and twice as mean, hopped up on the table and stole food right out of Lord Tywin's fingers. The king laughed so hard, some feared he'd burst. Robert also went to the Westerlands 3 years before the books. Robert Baratheon visited Tywin for his tourney. But let's talk about some depressing things after Robert took the throne. Not everything was sunshine and rainbows with Aerys dead. Tywin would lose his brother Tyget to pox in or after 285 AC, and around 286 AC, Tywin's youngest son, 13 years old, would greatly anger his father once again. While the boy had been traveling on a road near Lannisport, he and his brother Jaime spotted a young girl named Tysha being attacked by some men. Jaime drove them off while Tyrion made sure the girl was alright. She revealed that she was an orphan, and that she had been a crofter's daughter. Tyrion fell in love with the girl, had a drunk septon marry them, and settled her in a cottage near the Sunset Sea. When Tywin found out about this, he was pissed to say the least. He forced Jaime to tell Tyrion that Tysha was a whore who had been paid to make Tyrion a man. Tywin then ordered for his guards to gang rape the girl in their barracks, each guard giving her silver afterwards and setting Tyrion in the corner to watch. By the end, she had so many silver coins they were slipping through her fingers and rolling on the floor. Tywin then forced Tyrion to rape her last so he would remember her as she truly is, and pay her a gold coin because Lannisters were worth more.
and then he was given the Father of the Year award. About 2 years later, in 289 AC, the Greyjoys, led by Balon Greyjoy, began their rebellion against the throne by burning down the Lannister fleet anchored at Lannisport. However, after the rebellion was successfully put down, Tywin would rebuild the Lannister fleet. There was no rest for Tyrion, as the same year he had to deal with more of what he probably considered BS when Tyrion turned 16 and wanted to take a tour of the 9 free cities as his uncle Jaerion and Tygett had. However, Tywin refused to let him go for many reasons, the least of them because Tywin held the free cities in contempt. He claimed that they fought with coins instead of swords, and that while gold had its uses, wars were won with iron. As he told his children on a few occasions, give gold to a foe and he will just come back for more. Tywin also refused to allow Tyrion to journey to the free cities because he felt he couldn't trust Tyrion, and that Tywin's brothers had gone because he could trust them not to shame House Lannister or, marry whores. When Tyrion reminded him in 10 days he would be a man, free to travel where he wished, Tywin told him, "No man is free. Only children and fools think elsewise. Go, by all means. Wear motley and stand upon your head to amuse the Spice Lords and the Cheese Kings. Just see that you pay your own way, and put aside any thoughts of returning." When Tyrion had backed down, Tywin added a new jab, telling his son, "If it is useful occupation you require, useful occupation you shall have." So to mark his manhood, Tyrion was given charge of all the drains within Casterly Rock. Tyrion thinks he may have hoped the boy would fall in, but he never did, and the drains never drained half so well as when he had charge of them. Tyrion continued to be a sore spot for Tywin, and when his sister Jenna mentioned that Tyrion resembled Tywin the most out of all his children, he refused to speak with her for half a year. This, or something else, could have been why she went from being his loved sister to falling out of favor with him when she disappointed him. 2 years later, Tywin and Tyrion would have a minor spat when he wouldn't allow his youngest to go with his uncle Jaerion on a mission to Valyria to recover Brightroar, their lost family sword. It was a good thing Tywin had refused to let Tyrion go with his uncle on this quest to find Brightroar and other treasures of Valyria, as after a decade Jaerion never returned with his ship, the Laughing Lion. Tywin, despite his stormy relationship with his younger brother, sent men to look for him and traced him to Volantis, where half Jaerion's crew had abandoned him. Sadly, Tywin never found his brother. Though on the topic of Valyrian steel, it always upset Tywin that House Lannister no longer had a Valyrian steel blade. Thousands remained in the world, and about 200 in the Seven Kingdoms, yet all the times he offered to buy Valyrian longswords from an impoverished lesser house, he had been told no. At least 3 times Tywin learned that even poor lords cherished their old family swords, while they would gladly part with their daughters, should a Lannister ask. Right before the books, we know that Tywin came to King's Landing for the tourney on Joffrey's name day, hoping to see Jaime win the champion's crown. Afterwards, Cersei and her children were in the company of her father making the journey to Casterly Rock when Jon Arryn died, and that's where the books begin.